Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy, and I'm here with Shane. Thank you all for being here. And if you're here for the live chat, thank you so much for tuning in. We really love hearing your feedback and hearing your questions. Um, Today's video is a very groundbreaking video. This isn't something I've been able to find on my own. We're going to be breaking down all of the projects and experiments on record since the 1940s regarding weather modification. So when I was preparing for this video, I actually referenced our book, Sound the Alarm, because most of this information can be found here. But we wanted to make a video just because this topic has become mainstream and there's a lot of interest. So I want to make sure as many people know about this information we're going to share. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so before you leave, and like, comment, and share this video. So I don't think YouTube will really help with the promotion of this video because of the content. So I'm really relying on you all to share this video and let everyone know what's really going on. So we're going to start out with Project Cirrus, and I'm going to let Shane go into that.
All right. Thanks, Tracy. So a lot of people are probably not aware that weather modification, at least regarding hurricanes, goes all the way back to at least 1947. There were cloud seeding experiments prior to that, but the first time they ever tried to seed a hurricane was in 1947, which was called Project Cirrus, and this occurred in October of 1947. And this particular hurricane had already crossed over Florida and gone out to sea, and it was then chosen to be experimented upon with cloud seeding. In this case, they used dry ice, which is like frozen carbon dioxide, and they flew out and they dropped carbon dioxide or dry ice into the hurricane to see what would happen. And so they flew out and they dropped it in there, and then they came back. And then when they went out the next day to try it again, the hurricane was in a different spot than what they expected. They actually found the hurricane had turned west, to their surprise. And the hurricane ended up continuing west, and it even strengthened. So you can see by the line here that it was red when it went over Florida, and then it weakened. The yellow part is where it weakened, and then they seeded it. And then it not only strengthened, but it also turned west and it hit Savannah, Georgia. And it did cause a lot of damage, and it even caused one death as well. So there was a lot of outrage over this, and people were raising their concerns about the fact that this weather modification may have caused the storm to turn and cause more damage. And so this was done in part with General Electric as well as the United States government. And the project manager from General Electric said that he was 99% sure that the hurricane changed direction because of the cloud seeding experiment. Now, this caused a lot of outrage, and people were going to sue for the damages. And so they put together a study that was predetermined to show that hurricanes can do those turns naturally. And so they put this information out to the public, and they spread it everywhere that this was a natural occurrence, and the public ended up buying it, and they ended up dropping the lawsuit. But ever since 1947, weather modification has been considered a big liability, and so the government has been discouraged from doing so. However, that didn't necessarily stop them. It just caused them to do it underground, away from the public eye and under the cover of plausible deniability. And then
that brings up another, I'll just really quick, the obfuscating of these programs that started really early on in 1947 because they're afraid of the liability. So I just wanted to point out, if some people are wondering, like, how do we not know about this if this was going on for so long? Well, I think very early on they understood the liability was so great that it was in their interest to keep it underground or secret.
Right. Yeah, and so that took place in the late 40s. Cloud seeding began before that even. But then as early as 1960, we have this paper that was written by Commander William Koch of the U.S. Navy. And this paper was titled Weather Control and National Strategy. And it was all about, controlling the weather. And at the time, not only was there sort of a nuclear arms race between the East and the West, but there was also this weather arms race, which was relatively unknown to most people. However, the Navy was on top of it. Now, that opens us into the decade of the 1960s, which contains a lot of geoengineering projects. But I'm going to toss it over to Tracy to cover the 1960s.
All right. So the main reason we know so much of this information is Ben Livingston is a whistleblower, and he came out after Hurricane Katrina, and he shared all the experience he had with these projects I'm going to be talking about. So Project Stormfury, it was initially started to help, I guess, lower the intensity of storms. There had been a number of really intense storms that hit the US, and there was concern about, or there was a vested interest in trying to reduce the severity of hurricanes. All right, so Project Stormfury was a series of experiments, and they took place around, one was in China Lake, California, but they were all domestic, meaning they're in the US, and they were trying to control and, I guess, lower the intensity of thunderstorms by dropping silver iodine generators.
Massive surgery on the world's atmosphere might have unforeseen results, but the race to control it is on. President Johnson complained of America's slow pace.
That makes me also think these projects don't seem very complicated. All they need to do is get a plane to fly over the hurricane, which all commercial airlines do this, right? It's not hard to get above a hurricane and drop a very inexpensive product into it, and they can change the intensity of a hurricane. And, you know, for anyone who has suffered from a hurricane, that should be really upsetting, because this has existed for a long time, and all the lies and all the money they could have saved, all the damage they could have prevented by doing this to these hurricanes we're seeing. And then, well, I mean, now we know that they were actually generated, but
Yeah.
you know, just thinking like it's a simple solution. And it just kind of dawned on me when I
It is much easier to stop a hurricane than it is to start a hurricane. And a
right,
couple
because
things I wanted to.
they didn't have a lot of the technologies that we have access to, or they have access to now, and they were able to
Right.
do this with fairly basic instruments and technology.
Yeah, cloud seeding itself is a very basic and very simple experiment to do. You just drop stuff into a cloud for the most part. It does depend what you drop and where you drop it, but that's basically it. You're just sprinkling stuff into a cloud. A couple things I did want to point out is that that documentary was originally made known to me by Real Fishing Life, so I want to give him a shout out again. And then I also wanted to point out that the symbol on the door of that building was from the United Nations. So this project, Stormfury, and its governing board, actually. So when it comes to weather modification in general, a lot of that stuff has been overseen either by NOAA locally or by the United Nations globally.
Right. And it's just amazing that they've been able to keep this, well, it's not secret, but been able to kind of hide it for as long as they
It
have.
was public knowledge, and then that knowledge was lost to the public somehow over the last 3 or 4 decades. Yeah.
Not anymore. We're letting as many people know.
So
Okay.
as it turns out, so that Project Stormfury, we actually have a whistleblower who was involved in Stormfury. His name is Ben Livingston, and we also have his story as far as more details.
My name is Ben Livingston. I'm the first person to ever see the cloud with the intention to cause it to do military damage. So they sent me to the Hurricane Hunter Squadron in Jacksonville, Florida. That squadron, of course, had just become involved in Project Stormfury. We were the first ones to fly into hurricanes for the purpose of modifying them, if you will. That was Project Stormfury. I began to be extremely confident that we could do whatever what we wanted to with a hurricane. The Project Stormfury had been going on since 1961, and they had already done 2 experiments, one in 61 and 63. Well, by 1964, when I was there in 1964, I wrote the plan and started to have them track and a mission for every flight that was on the hurricane cloud seeding experiments. So we had documentation for everything. Operations of Project Stormfury are very positive. By 1969, we had all the latest state-of-the-art equipment in a number of airplanes, and we also had aircraft equipped with dispensing equipment to put silver iodide into a hurricane. The hypothesis for how to do this had been designed, developed by Dr. Joanne Simpson, and her husband, Dr. Robert Simpson, was the director of Project Stormfury for a number of years. Dr. Simpson, at the time Project Stormfury started, he was the head of the United States Weather Bureau. With the funds being made available for Project Stormfury, they created a new department or new entity of government called the National Hurricane Research Center. And Dr. Bob Simpson, was a director of that group. This book, Hurricane Watch here, is very important because it's written by a person who's a former director of the National Hurricane Center. So he's had worlds of experience in the research in these things. And I might add that I took Dr. Bob Sheets on his first airplane ride into a hurricane in 1964. But he has documented a number of things that are important to the subject we're talking about, in which he's described every storm, the background to those storms, what was done to them, and the results. If there are going to be unintended consequences, you would know within an hour after you'd seeded a hurricane, you would know that something is not going right. We have to do something different before it causes damage.
So you'd have days to be adjusting.
You'd have days. The way we plan on doing it, we'd only have 2 days. On August 18th in 1969, Hurricane Debbie was seeded 5 times at 2-hour intervals. And the maximum wind speeds had decreased from 115 to 80 miles per hour. That's a pretty remarkable reduction of more than 45% in damage reduction potential. The storm was left alone on the 19th, and on the 20th went back and seeded that cloud the second time and decreased the winds again to just under 100 miles per hour, or about 24% more damage reduction potential. It's interesting that we were able to do that and have the results confirmed by Stanford University in 1969. Since 1947, the government has used the logic or reasoning that liability is a killer for weather modification. You don't like to believe this, but there's a possibility, and the economics of it verifies the fact that there is so much damage done that the construction industry in general all over the United States benefits because the cost of materials goes up. So the insurance company may or may not gain from having these damage reductions take place. As far as the energy industry is concerned, we all know that they get their money back almost immediately by increasing the price of their product. And it's not unheard of to believe that the actions performed by FEMA or the government is not a surefire way to buy votes. So there may not be any political or economic motivation on the government or some major industry's part to reduce the damages from hurricanes.
So yeah, we heard there they decided a long time ago it wasn't financially beneficial to prevent hurricanes or to weaken hurricanes, which you would think would be the opposite. But it's
right. It seems that certain industries actually benefit from these disasters, hence the name disaster capitalism.
And including the 4-letter agency that we've been hearing so much about.
Yeah, yeah. The
and I'm going to get a little context box if I speak too much on that, but I think people know
right. I almost
what we're talking about.
Well.
Yeah. All right. So it's okay if I move on to Operation Popeye regarding
Yes.
the Vietnam War. I'll quote a little bit from our book, and this is from Ben Livingston, just so I get it right. And this is a quote from him. I was asked to start to put together a top secret operation to go to Vietnam to see if we could make it rain more over there as a military operation. All the roads over there were dirt roads. So when it rains, it causes a lot of problems. so that during the monsoon season, there was so much rain and water in the roads, the trucks couldn't move very freely. Their mission was to make it rain during the dry season. So, and these experiments were very successful in that they did make the roads impassable, and there was even a bridge on the Ho Chi Minh Trail that they were trying to bomb or to destroy, but they weren't able to do it that way. But with the rain, they were able to wash that bridge away. And one of the experiments, they were able to make it rain 14 inches in a single day.
All right, so we also have a video of Operation Popeye, and once again, Ben Livingston was involved in that project as well.
I was cleared top secret, eyes only, as high as you could get. The Joint Chiefs of Staff had been wishing for quite some time, in terms of years, that they had some way of slowing the trucks down in Vietnam. That led me to advise the Joint Chiefs of Staff that we had a potential weapon system. And so I was asked to start to put together a top secret operation to go to Vietnam to see if we couldn't make it rain more over there as a military operation. All the roads over there were dirt roads, and when it rained, it caused them a lot of problems. So that during the monsoon season, there was so much rain and water in the roads that the trucks really couldn't move very freely. Our mission was to make it rain during the dry season. And I nurtured one of those clouds until it finally got it in well past the freezing level, and then the cloud developed a lot of convective activity, and it started sucking clouds into it. Just building up and building up, and I took a series of pictures that I called for 41 minutes. By the end of 41 minutes, we had flown up to over 65,000 feet, and we still couldn't reach the top of the cloud. So we knew we had a barn burner there. And by the next morning, we had washed out everything in the world and did a lot of damage to people and all that sort of thing. But it was a real success as far as blocking the roads off. And by the 13th of October, we had a couple of storms that had actually washed out bridges. And the results were so successful until I was called down to Saigon to brief the generals, the Air Force generals, and Army generals down there. And they suggested that I need to go make this report to President Johnson back in Washington, D.C. They were excited about it, but they had no authorization, if you will, to use this as a military weapon system. I was there in very top secret classification as a research project. That's why we were able to conduct the mission without the international community, if you will, being apprised of what we were doing and how we were doing it. It was kept top secret for a long time. It was first reported that this was going on in 1972. That's the first time that Congress ever heard about it. So as you can see, it was not something everyone knew about for a long time. President Johnson was very mild, and then he asked me what I was doing and told me he had read and been briefed on what we were doing and how we were doing it, and he asked me my opinion of it and asked if I thought that we could continue that. I said, well, I see no reason why we can't continue it. This is out of the June 1974 Science magazine. This is when the Senate got wind that something was been going on in Vietnam that they didn't know about. Well, it's interesting to note that this project ended in 1972. It started in 1966. So you can see the secrecy. When I came back to the States, where I had time to do something as far as weather modification was concerned, I went back to my duties, if you will, as being the military member of the Project Stormfury Advisory Committee.
Acting commander of what base?
I was the acting commanding officer at the Corona Naval Weapons Research Center.
And they worked on a lot more there than just weather weapons, didn't they?
Yes, they do, but my main contribution at Corona was to write a plan for weather modification control for the whole world.
All right, so that was Dr. Ben Livingston, and I really can't believe that this is the first I've heard about these experiments. And I think for a lot of people, this is the first time they're hearing about the possibility of weather modification. And it doesn't seem like, I keep thinking like these don't seem like very sophisticated operations. They seem pretty basic. So
Yeah.
I'll let you go. I'll let you continue with the next
All right.
topic.
So interestingly enough, Ben Livingston, he actually did meet with LBJ. It was probably during the mid 60s, I believe, that he probably started with that. I think 1967 was when that operation began. But as early as 1962, Lyndon Johnson was already talking about weather control in this clip here.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
All right. So he spoke about determining the world's cloud layer, which is something that began a long time before I was born, but it continues even to this day. So what we call chemtrails or cloud seeding has probably gone on since at least 1947, but during the 60s, it definitely became more prevalent. And then during the 90s, it became basically ubiquitous. I found out about chemtrails in March of 1998. So I've been investigating chemtrails for 26 years now. And I didn't, however, was not aware that in 1996, there was a document that was titled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Now, this particular document, it does cover chemtrails, but it also covers everything else and how they can work together. So at least by the mid 90s, they knew how chemtrails and various other things would work together to produce certain effects. So one of the things that they go into is artificial weather, how they can control the weather through use of spraying, but also the other thing that they talk about is ionospheric, using artificial ionospheric mirrors to reflect radar beams so that we could do over the horizon radar, as well as ionospheric heating for the purpose of weather modification. So one of the things I wanted to point out in this graphic is that they use a crossed beam approach for generating an artificial ionospheric mirror. Now, this crossed beam approach will also produce those interference patterns like I was talking about before, where they have these parallel lines that are called plane waves. And we've seen this many times in cloud formations, which modern day meteorologists have termed artificial, or they've termed atmospheric gravity wave clouds. But while that may potentially be a rare natural phenomenon, it's becoming a very common unnatural phenomenon as well that results from the interference of two crossed beams. So I just wanted to point that out, that we have, various NEXRAD towers that are Doppler radar towers, as well as ships that are also equipped with this, not only Doppler NEXRAD radar, but they have these, what they call C-band, C-based X-band radars, which are also like super NEXRADs. So these transmitters are capable of producing those kinds of patterns. Another thing that they cover in this document, Owning the Weather by 2025, is disruption of communication and radar via ionospheric control. One way that they do this is by directing their beams at certain portions of the ionosphere to destabilize it. So the ionosphere, like in this graphic, acts as a natural ionospheric mirror to reflect the signals. But when they disrupt it, they can cause scintillations or vibrations or waviness in that layer that distorts the reflections of the radio waves. So it can interfere with radar and communication and various other things. Another thing that's also mentioned in this Owning the Weather by 2025 document is the fact that they can, it's more like space warfare. And another thing that they mention is using radio waves to accelerate electrons to create high frequency induced electron beams. Now, these could be targeted at satellites or spacecraft. And one thing that's mentioned in a few of these documents, believe here, and here, it is mentioned that these effects are practically indistinguishable from natural space weather events. So basically, HARP and some of these other ionospheric heaters are creating events that are indistinguishable from space weather. So I just wanted to point that out. A lot of people have talked about, like the Northern Lights and everything being able to be created by HARP, and it is possible. However, I do believe that the recent Northern Lights that we've been able to see in southern locations even are a result of the natural solar flare activity that has been occurring, or at least what appears to be natural solar flare activity. So anyway, they do cover space weather in this document as well. And so they are also working on modifying space weather. Their roadmap actually, so the reason that they say owning the weather by 2025 is because all of these various different methods and modes of controlling the weather, which includes artificial ionospheric mirrors, chemicals and chemical trails, directed energy. All of these various things have a roadmap that is supposed to achieve their maximum capabilities by 2025. And so that's why the document is called Owning the Weather by 2025. So this does bring me to the chemtrail aspect of it. So, ever since at least 1998, I've been aware of these chemical trails in the sky. Now, some of these are done by military planes that have these dispensing equipment aboard, but some of these are also being done by commercial planes that have had their jet fuel reformulated over the years. So back in the early 90s, I believe, the JP8 jet fuel was reformulated to contain various substances like ethylene dibromide, methyl tertiary butyl ethylene, aluminum oxide, and barium stearate. And so aluminum is in there allegedly to be a reflective substance to reflect the sun's heat back into space to try to, stop global warming. That's their excuse. But aluminum is also very electrically conductive. And by increasing the electrical conductivity of the atmosphere, you increase the susceptibility of the atmosphere to electromagnetic frequencies like radio and microwaves, thus the NEXRAD towers. All right. So another thing I want to talk about is the patents that we have discovered for, at least when it comes to hurricanes. Now, I've shown in the past patents for directed energy and a couple of other things, but I haven't necessarily shown these patents yet. So this patent is for a hurricane and tornado control device. Now, in the patent, they do reference sound waves. However, there could be other types of longitudinal energy like scalar, as well as radio and microwave are all known to have effects on storms. This is from 2001. However, in 2012, there is also a patent for a method to influence the direction of travel of hurricanes. So this is all about steering hurricanes. And a lot of this is done, once again, with electromagnetic and longitudinal energy applications. So by, hitting certain parts of the storm with certain types of energy, you can actually influence the direction of travel of the storm. But then another reason that the commercial pilots might not be speaking out is because the commercial jet fuel was actually reformulated without much knowledge to the, I would say, pilots themselves. I would say the average commercial pilot has no idea what the formula of their jet fuel actually is. So a lot of this does fly under the radar, so to speak, pun intended. But as far as the pilots go, I can see why there's not more speaking out is because a lot of them either don't know or don't care. However, the same thing is actually happening with meteorologists as well. And a lot of people say, well, why haven't any meteorologists come forward to speak out against this? Well, some of them have. They've just been ignored by the mainstream. One of which is a meteorologist by the name of Scott Stevens, who I want to play a clip from now.
My name is Scott Stevens. I studied meteorology at the University of Kansas, and that was my first TV job was on the air was in Topeka, and I worked in Omaha and Tulsa, Albany, New York, and then out into eastern Idaho and the Pocatello, Idaho Falls market for the last 10 years of my 20-year career doing weather. It wasn't until about 2005 when I got deep into the weather modification aspect of this story of geoengineering. One of the parts of the program that is very important that plays into the chemtrails is the precision of these actions in the atmosphere. These chemtrails are absolutely required, so they introduce the right energy at the right location for the right length of time. These trails are wires in the sky.
The combined technologies like HARP and the chemtrails were designed to work together as weather weapons.
HARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, it is filled with phased array antennas. They steer microwaves into the ionosphere where they will activate all of the ions up there.
They can use excitation waves that actually affect the metallic particles. So we've ionized the air column. They can heat it, they can cool it. HARP has directional antennas, and they can focus their antennas on where they want to move the jet stream, and they can hit the jet stream, and they create an artificial high.
If you accentuate the high, if you amplify a little bit, it's like building a mound of dirt, and you have a little creek or a little stream of water coming. You build the mound of dirt, that water's not going to go through it. So you build the mound, and then that's going to impact storms that are inbound. And so it's very easy to add those particulates of aluminum, barium, and whatever else they want to put in there. And as you add heat to that, those particulates then radiate the heat into the atmosphere, and it warms. And what does a warming atmosphere do? Boom, it expands. We see more intense droughts. We see rainfall rates of 1 to 2.25 inches an hour, and sometimes even rainfall, 1.25 inches a minute. It's just unheard of. And so when you get the atmosphere capable of conducting this kind of electricity, plus the engineers, you're going to end up with weather that is extreme, and that's putting it kindly. You can kill a storm in place. That's easy to do with HARP. You'll see the texture and the structure of the storm just melt. And that was one of the big epiphanies I had in forecasting. Anticipating a winter storm coming through, you've got to set forecast out that night, and you're waiting for the snow to start, and it just doesn't. And you see a warming zone begin to show up on the satellite loops. The clouds literally just begin to warm. And then that collapses the potential of the storm to put down the moisture.
All right. So as we saw there, some of what he said corroborates with what we've heard from Dane Wigington about reporting on the frequencies being able to repel the electrically charged atmosphere. So when the atmosphere is more charged, like it is with the chemtrails and with the energy, then they can repel it more easily. And so that's one way that they can actually control storms, like a guardrail to keep it in its lane, but they can also push storms away. But that's also another way to control the wind speed as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, a lot of people talk about chemtrails as being a conspiracy that's not necessarily true. However, I did want to point out that there is a CIA operation called stratospheric aerosol injection that they refer to as SAI. And I do have a clip of a CIA official talking about just that.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives.
All right, so there you have it. A CIA official trying to basically sell us on the idea of chemtrails as if they were a good thing.
I believed it for a long time. It's now looking back, I'm kind of dumbfounded that I thought it was conspiracy. I've been hearing this for a long time. Also, Dane Wigington did a really great documentary called The Dimming, and he goes into everything about chemtrails and so much evidence, pictures of the plane turning on and off the trail, and it's just it's unquestionable what they're doing if you really look into it.
Yeah.
So is there anything else on the chemtrails or anything that we wanted to talk about?
That's all I have for today. Although this is not an exhaustive history of weather modification, this is just some of the more public and larger projects that I wanted people to know about, that there's plenty of proof out there in the public domain. And so, I just wanted to, highlight some of these big points.
And then also something I'm learning through my research is that the U.S. is very behind as far as the disclosure of these things. On the Middle East and China, it seems like they've been a lot more open about their ability to modify the weather. So it's about time the U.S., know the truth and know what's really being put, into our environment. And if you watch the dimming, there's a lot of other implications that these chemtrails have. And also, there's a lot of other uses that these chemicals have that might be related to the fires that we've been reporting on. So, yeah.
Yes, I would like to point out that aluminum oxide is a desiccant and an accelerant, very much similar to thermite.
Right. So that might be related to some of the intense wildfires we've been seeing so often. Okay, and again, if you want to read more about this, this is all written in a chapter in our book, Sound the Alarm, which you can get at themauibook.com. And if you're here for the live chat, thank you guys so much. And thank you to everyone for all your support, all the amazingly positive comments that I've been getting from trying to, spread the word about these programs. So again, thank you guys all, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.